Samuel L. Jackson, one of the greatest faces of cinema, has lit up the silver screen for millions of audiences worldwide. From an unknown black boy growing up in poverty in Chattanooga, Tennessee, with a voice mocked for his stutter and a childhood devoid of a father's love, he rose to become one of the most powerful actors Hollywood has ever witnessed. With an almost miraculous ability to transform pain into art, he has portrayed unforgettable characters, from Jules Winfield in Pulp Fiction, to Nick Fury in the Marvel Universe, from Mace Windu in Star Wars, to Frozone in The Incredibles, making the entire world listen to his voice. Over more than 5 decades, Samuel has not only redefined what it means to be a box office star, but has also become an icon of resilience, of rising after falls that seemed impossible to overcome. Yet behind this legacy lies a tragic truth, a silent battle with loneliness, years of addiction, the shadow of illness, and accidents that nearly claimed his life. The world has applauded him for decades, but few are ready to face the haunting reality he carries. The scars of an abandoned childhood, the long nights fighting not to succumb, the moments teetering on the edge of death when the spotlight of the screen has faded. Before we begin, if Samuel Jackson's films have ever made you laugh, cry, or find hope, please leave a heart emoji as a tribute to a man who has dedicated his life to igniting dreams for others. For behind the laughter, behind the roaring applause, there remains a brutal truth. At 77, Jackson's tragedy is more painful than any role he has ever played. Born on December 21, 1948 in Washington, D.C., but raised in Chattanooga, Tennessee, Samuel L. Jackson entered the world not with a warm beginning but with a fracture that would never heal. His father, Roy Henry Jackson, was a man consumed by alcohol, living far from the family and ultimately dying from the consequences of his addiction. Throughout Samuel's childhood, his father appeared only twice, like fleeting shadows that left no warmth, only a cold, permanent void. His mother, Elizabeth, bore the weight of the family on her frail shoulders, working in a factory before taking a job as a buyer for a mental health facility, striving to provide stability but unable to replace the love and encouragement a child needs from a father. Samuel was largely raised by his strict grandparents, who enforced discipline but lacked tenderness. In that environment, Samuel learned early that life offered no ease, that to survive he had to be tougher than his tender childhood self. But there was another enemy, a silent and persistent one that haunted him from his earliest years, a stutter. In classrooms at Riverside High, amid the chatter of peers, Samuel would stand to speak only to be betrayed by words. They stuck in his throat, shattered on his tongue, turning into endless, halting sounds. Classmates burst into laughter, teachers sighed, and the boy could only bow his head, swallow his tears, and wonder why his voice couldn't be like everyone else's. Every mockery, every jeer carved deeper into his soul, planting a haunting thought in his young mind. He was different, useless, not good enough. In Chattanooga at that time, where racial segregation still marked every street and sign, Samuel carried a double burden. His skin color deemed him inferior, and his faltering voice made him a laughingstock even within his own community. A child who wanted to shout to assert himself found his throat locked by stammering pauses. This frustration drove him to fits of desperate anger, punishing himself for not being able to speak properly. In that stifled rage, he discovered a strange way to break the chains of his hesitation. Whenever words threatened to stall, he blurted out a curse. That raw, seemingly meaningless language freed him from the cycle of stammering. As he grew, Samuel turned fiery expletives like motherfucker into a kind of charm, a rhythm to overcome the betrayal of his own body. No one could have known that this language would later become his on-screen trademark, not just for its cool, fierce edge, but because it was a living remnant of a childhood spent battling language to be heard. The absence of his father left Samuel yearning for validation, a hug, a simple "I'm proud of you," but those simple things never came. Instead, there were days when Samuel sat alone in their small Chattanooga home, staring out the window at other children playing, his heart heavy with the question, "Am I truly loved?" That sense of abandonment and lack of affection pushed the boy into a world of imagination where he began to dream of becoming someone else, a character on stage or screen, someone who could make the world listen instead of laugh. Yet reality was always cruel. In school, he was often called mocking nicknames, excluded from playgroups, and burdened with a sense of rejection. From that a smoldering fire grew within Samuel. If no one saw him, he would make the world see him. Samuel Jackson's childhood was a string of days without a father, without understanding, without faith in his own voice. But from that void, from that painful silence, he nurtured a relentless will, a burning desire to prove himself at all costs. And those childhood wounds, a missing father, a faltering voice, a child dismissed, became the bedrock that forged the strength for him to later stand in Hollywood, where even the brightest lights could not erase the darkness that once clung to him. In that childhood, Samuel didn't know who he would become, but deep in his subconscious, he knew to survive he had to learn to turn tragedy into strength, to transform shame into a weapon. And that tragedy, though brutal, was the first chapter in the journey that took him from an invisible child to an immortal legend. Emerging from a childhood scarred by wounds, Samuel L. Jackson carried in his heart a burning desire to be seen, heard, and validated. As he stepped into young adulthood, he chose Morehouse College in Atlanta, a prestigious institution for black male students, hoping it would open a new path. Initially, Samuel pursued marine biology, driven by a childhood dream of becoming an ocean scientist. But, like many dreams of a young man still searching for his identity, that aspiration quickly faded. The dry subjects, numbers, and formulas left him feeling lost. He switched to architecture, then finally to drama, as if his subconscious was guiding him back to the world he had long craved, a world of words, expression, and gazes, where he could become anyone or anything to escape the dismissed identity he carried. But America in the late 1960s was far from a peaceful land. The nation was shaken by the civil rights movement, by voices demanding equality for black people, and by assassinations that shattered faith in justice. When Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated in 1968, the black community was engulfed in grief, rage, and despair. For Samuel, that shock was like a bolt of lightning, forcing him to choose, stay silent for safety, or stand up and face danger. He chose the latter. In 1969, Samuel joined fellow students in a bold protest at Morehouse College. They occupied the administration building, holding members of the Board of Trustees as hostages to demand curriculum reforms, insisting the school reflect the realities of society and teach black students what mattered to their lives. For Samuel, this wasn't just a political act. It was a way to shatter the silence of his childhood, a way to shout, "We exist, we deserve to be heard." But the cost of that action was steep. The police stormed in. Samuel was arrested, charged with unlawful confinement, and suspended from school for 2 years. Suddenly, his world collapsed. From a hopeful student, he became labeled as dangerous and radical. His family was thrown into panic. His mother received warnings that the FBI was watching her son, and that his involvement in the movement could make him a target of political violence. In fear, she forced him to leave Atlanta to protect his life. For Samuel, it was a deep cut to his soul. He had acted for ideals, for justice, but the result was punishment and a criminal label. The years that followed saw him far from campus, working as a social worker in Los Angeles to make ends meet. Each day he witnessed poverty, despair, and violence in neglected black communities. He realized life granted him no privileges. He had to struggle, piecing together fragments of faith to survive. And in those seemingly aimless days, Samuel began to nurture a new understanding. The power of art could surpass slogans and banners. He saw that his community's pain needed not just angry cries, but stories told, characters portrayed, and voices raised on stage and screen to ensure the world could no longer ignore them. 2 years later, he returned to Morehouse, earning his bachelor's degree in drama, but he was no longer the dreamy student of before. He was a Samuel tempered by disappointment, by the betrayal of the system, and by the fear that his life could be taken at any moment. The experiences at Morehouse left a lasting mark. He understood his life's path would never be smooth. He could be seen as a troublemaker, stripped of opportunities, but he also realized that from the darkness of punishment, he could find light. The Morehouse protest may have stolen 2 years of his youth, but it also ignited a fire in his soul, a fire of unrelenting determination that would follow him in every role, every line, every glance. From that upheaval, Samuel learned a bitter truth. In this world, to be heard, you must pay a price. sometimes your entire future. But for him, silence was far more terrifying. With his drama degree from Morehouse finally in hand, Samuel L. Jackson stepped into a new chapter of his life, one he imagined would open doors to the spotlight of the stage. But New York in the 1970s was no easy place for an unknown black man with no connections or launch pad. The glittering city felt like a massive stage, crowded with millions scrambling for survival. And in that throng, Samuel was just another faceless figure, lost and easily swallowed by the shadows. He began his theater career with forgettable supporting roles, sometimes an extra, other times a handful of lines in plays no one remembered. There were nights when he stood under dim lights, sweat beading on his forehead, heart pounding. But the audience remained indifferent, their eyes passing over him as if he didn't exist. Each round of applause at the end of the show seemed reserved for others, leaving him to retreat backstage, with empty hands and a silent sense of defeat. Samuel gravitated to off-Broadway stages, where young actors full of ambition gathered, hoping for a chance to catch the eye of a big producer. He appeared in A Soldier's Play, and August Wilson's The Piano Lesson, works rich in artistic value but offering him little recognition. There he learned patience, turning every small moment on stage into an opportunity to reveal himself. Yet even so, he still felt invisible, as if all his efforts echoed in an empty room. To survive, Samuel took on odd jobs. He waited tables, hauled loads, even accepted demeaning work just to pay rent in Harlem. The city showed no mercy. Every step on the crowded sidewalks was a reminder that if he fell, no one would bother to help him up. Those days filled Samuel with a constant sense of humiliation. He watched peers his age surge ahead, some landing films, others winning awards, while he repeated the cycle of auditions, rejections, and returning to his dim little room. Each time his headshot was returned without a glance, he heard echoes from his past. "You're not good enough. You're just invisible." But it was in that darkness that a defiant fire began to smolder. Samuel told himself, if the world wouldn't see him, he would force it to. He spent nights poring over scripts, practicing in front of the mirror, honing every furrowed brow, every glance, every pause in dialogue. He studied masters like Sidney Poitier and James Earl Jones, dreaming that one day, the voice once mocked for its stutter would become a sharp weapon, slicing through the screen. But while he patiently sharpened his craft, the silence and invisibility still loomed. The New York years weren't glamorous. They were years of darkness, of pushing his spirit to the brink. There were nights he sat alone in his cold apartment, script in hand, but eyes vacant, wondering if he was wasting his life on a pipe dream. In those moments of weakness, he turned to alcohol, to drugs, to numb the invisible pain, and that spiral would later drag him deeper into the abyss. But it was also the darkness of New York that forged his resilience. Each rejection made him rise again, auditioning once more. Each slight sharpened his gaze and voice. He learned to swallow his tears, transforming them into fuel for the next day. And though the city still treated him like dust, he began to see something valuable in himself, an unbreakable tenacity. The New York years were when Samuel Jackson was drowned in invisibility, in isolation, and humiliation, but it was from that darkness that he nurtured a fire that would one day blaze brightly on screen, a fire called defiance, defying fate, defying his past, defying the mocking laughter that had followed him since boyhood. And that darkness, no matter how cruel, became the stark black canvas that would make his light shine even brighter later on. The grueling years in New York taught Samuel L. Jackson how to stand firm in the darkness, but they also opened a dangerous door, the door to addiction. It began innocently enough, a few drinks after a failed performance, a few puffs of a joint to unwind, before quickly becoming something he couldn't live without. As his confidence was eroded by countless rejections, alcohol and cocaine became a temporary salve, lulling him into the illusion that everything was fine. But the truth was, those substances were silently destroying his health, his willpower, and the most important relationships in his life. There were nights when Samuel stumbled into his dark Harlem apartment, drunk and collapsing onto the cold wooden floor, letting the bottle roll away and white powder linger on the table. The ticking of the clock became the soundtrack to his nightmares, where he saw his father's face, the man who died from alcohol, as a cruel warning. He recognized he was treading the same dark path but lacked the strength to stop. His wife, LaTanya Richardson, who was also struggling to build her acting career, often found Samuel in states where he was unrecognizable. The breaking point came when their young daughter, Zoe, walked into the room and saw her father slumped in a chair, unconscious, with foam at the corners of his mouth. That moment was like a knife to Latania's heart and a wound that would never fade in Zoe's memory. The family tried to intervene, but Samuel repeatedly denied the problem, insisting he had it under control, that it was just a way to relieve stress. Yet the spiral continued. Each moment of stress drove him to alcohol, each rejected role pushed him to cocaine, and with each hit, he sank deeper into the abyss. Friends in the theater world began to distance themselves, directors hesitated to call his name, and the already scarce opportunities grew even slimmer. There were times he took the stage, half-conscious, stumbling over lines, his eyes vacant. He knew he was destroying his future, but like a man bound, he was powerless to stop his fall. By the late 1980s, Samuel had hit rock bottom. His body was gaunt, his spirit broken, his career stagnant. In one overdose, he collapsed in his apartment and was rushed to the hospital. The doctors said a few more minutes could have cost him his life. That was the moment his family issued an ultimatum: go to rehab or lose everything. This time, Samuel had no way out. He entered rehab with the dread of a man facing execution, filled with fear and shame. But it was in those cold, white-walled rooms that he truly faced himself. He realized he had spent years running from his childhood wounds with alcohol and drugs instead of confronting and healing them. He understood that continuing would only repeat his father's tragic death, leaving his wife and daughter a cruel legacy. Rehab was far from easy. His body trembled, cold sweats soaked him, and the craving for drugs burned like fire through his veins. Night after night, he thrashed in bed, feeling as if 1,000 knives were slicing his flesh. There were moments he wanted to give up, to scream for one more hit to end the pain. But each time Zoe's face flashed in his mind, he clenched his fists, reminding himself he had to live. Through it all, Latanya visited faithfully, holding his hand, telling him the family still believed in him, that he had a chance to start over. That love, combined with the fear of losing everything, kept Samuel going. After months, he slowly broke free from the grip of addiction. It wasn't an easy victory, it was the fiercest battle of his life. But from that abyss, Samuel discovered a bitter truth. The tragedies that nearly destroyed him were also the raw material for his rebirth. Not long after leaving rehab, he landed a role in Spike Lee's Jungle Fever, playing a crack addict, a part only someone who had lived through hell could portray with raw truth. That role was a fusion of pain and redemption, the turning point that lifted Samuel from the depths of addiction to the launchpad of cinema. But in the late 1980s, before that light arrived, Samuel stood on the edge of life and death, trapped in the spiral of addiction, with no one daring to believe that the man collapsed on the floor that day would one day become an immortal icon of Hollywood. Emerging from the darkness of rehab, Samuel L. Jackson stepped out as a new man, still trembling from the throes of withdrawal, but with a spark of light returning to his eyes. And then, as if by a strange twist of fate, an opportunity arrived unexpectedly. Director Spike Lee, who had followed Samuel's work from his New York theater days, cast him as Gator Purify in Jungle Fever 1991. Gator was a crack addict, a fallen son who lied and lost everything for another hit. For many actors, it was a minor supporting role, a mere brushstroke in a larger story. But for Samuel, Gator was a mirror of his own life. The nightmare he had just escaped, the raw truth embedded in his very flesh. On set, he didn't need to imagine. He had lived in Gator's body for years, had seen desperate addicts in the shadows of Harlem apartments, had heard the anguished hiss of a lighter in the night. He brought all those memories to the screen, unfiltered and unpolished, a truth so raw it was chilling. The scene where Gator dances in the living room, both humorous and heartbreaking, became one of the film's most unforgettable moments. The audience laughed, then fell silent as they realized they were witnessing a man's self-destruction. Samuel performed not as if it were a role, but as a public confession, an indictment of his own past. And something miraculous happened. For the first time, people truly saw Samuel L. Jackson. The 1991 Cannes Film Festival honored him with the Best Supporting Actor award, a rare accolade for such a small but explosive role. For Samuel, that moment felt like a baptism, a confirmation that he was no longer invisible. From the ashes of addiction, he had turned suffering into art, shame into strength, Yet after the applause faded and the can lights dimmed, he knew this reprieve was only temporary. Beyond the glamour, temptation still lurked. The cravings for drugs never fully vanished. Always waiting for a moment of weakness to return, he had to remind himself daily that another fall would leave no miracles to save him. The role of Gator gave him a fresh start but also served as a warning that his past would always trail him like a shadow. After Jungle Fever, Samuel's career began to gain traction. People no longer referred to him as the black supporting actor or that unknown guy from New York, but started recognizing him as a true talent. Yet behind the joy was exhaustion and a quiet fear that it could all vanish at any moment. He still carried the weight of his family, the haunting need to prove his worth, and the specter of addiction whispering in the dark. Gator wasn't his final salvation, but a door cracked open, revealing the path he could take. That path was still rough, fraught with traps, but for the first time in his life, he knew he could keep walking. In the eyes of his wife and daughter, he saw a glimmer of hope that from the deepest hell this man could return, could stand tall, could become something more than an addict, an artist, a warrior, a legend, taking shape. After the resounding success of Jungle Fever, Samuel L. Jackson began walking a new path. But it was truly 1994 that transformed him into a legend. Quentin Tarantino, the director renowned for his bold storytelling and razor-sharp dialogue, handed Samuel the role of Jules Winfield in Pulp Fiction. And in just 2 hours on screen, Samuel went from a little-known name to one of the indispensable faces of American cinema. Jules wasn't just a hitman in a suit, wielding a gun and quoting the Bible before pulling the trigger. Jules was an icon, cold yet profound, violent yet philosophical, ruthless yet harboring a twisted faith in redemption. When Samuel spoke, the voice once mocked for its stutter now boomed like thunder. Every word, every inflection, every glare straight into his opponent's eyes left audiences frozen in their seats, holding their breath for what would come next. And the Ezekiel 25:17 monologue became one of the most iconic scenes in film history, a moment where Samuel didn't just act, he commanded the screen, seized the audience's minds, and etched his name into Hollywood's legacy. The role earned him an Oscar nomination for Best Supporting Actor and a BAFTA win, but above all, it lifted Samuel out of the shadows of obscurity and placed him among the most sought-after actors of the decade. It was blinding light, a dream realized, the ultimate answer to the years he had been dismissed, rejected, and ridiculed. But that light didn't just bring glory, it cast a long shadow, the shadow of Jules Winfield himself, an image so powerful it overshadowed other facets of Samuel's identity. From then on, the public and Hollywood began boxing him into the mold of the cool black guy who swears like a sailor and kills with a stare. Every time he stepped out in public, people mimicked Jules's lines, bursting into laughter over words that had once been his weapon against stuttering. The world celebrated him, but it also confined him in a new cage, the cage of stereotype. And Samuel, though proud of the role, felt a quiet chokehold from the price he paid. He later admitted that for years after Pulp Fiction, he was called by name as if Jules Winfield were the only existence, with no real Samuel L. Jackson beyond it. The light had illuminated him, but the shadow clung relentless. Behind the scenes, Samuel faced new pressure. How to prove he wasn't just one role, that he could embody a multitude of characters, from heroes to villains, from drama to action. He threw himself into work, taking on project after project, exhausting himself on sets to affirm his worth in this new standing. But when the lights dimmed and he returned to his apartment, there was still solitude, still the fear that one day it could all vanish, that Jules's glow might be his sole peak before fading forever. Pulp Fiction had saved him from the abyss of anonymity, but it also handed him a burden, the weight of expectations, of the mask the world forced him to wear. And Samuel, caught between that light and shadow, could only do one thing: keep moving forward, despite the tragedy of being bound by his own success. Before Pulp Fiction, before the world knew the name Samuel L. Jackson, he endured a harrowing incident that tore through his body and etched an indelible fear into his memory. A subway accident in 1988. It was a seemingly ordinary evening in New York, the city that never sleeps. Samuel, still a struggling actor, was trudging through auditions, scraping by on meager earnings from off-Broadway stages, and carrying the exhaustion of battling addiction while searching for his place. He stepped onto a subway train, expecting a short ride, but seconds later, his life nearly ended on the cold tracks. As the train doors closed, part of his foot got caught. In an instant, the train lurched forward, dragging him across the dusty platform. The screech of metal, the rush of wind past his ears, and the frantic pounding of his heart like a war drum filled the moment. In that split second, he was certain he'd be sucked into the tunnel, his body crushed beneath the heavy iron wheels. People say that when facing death, your life flashes before your eyes, but Samuel later recounted that what he felt most vividly wasn't memories. It was emptiness, a helpless void, as if all his efforts, years of endurance, and unformed dreams would end in those fleeting seconds. He couldn't scream, couldn't call for help, only heard the train grinding against his foot and thought, "This is the end." A miracle intervened. A quick-thinking passenger yanked the door open, and with a forceful tug, Samuel was pulled free from the metal trap. Just before the train plunged into the darkness, he collapsed onto the platform, gasping for air, drenched in cold sweat, his foot throbbing with excruciating pain. Paramedics were called, and hours later, doctors diagnosed a torn ACL and severe meniscus damage. The pain lingered for over a year, forcing him to rely on crutches for 10 months and endure countless physical therapy sessions. Each step felt like a knife stabbing his knee, each sleepless night a battle with despair. Samuel, who had just escaped the grip of drugs, now faced a new enemy, a body betraying itself. Beyond the physical pain, his soul was tormented. The sound of a passing train sent shivers down his spine, conjuring the terrifying moment when death was inches away. Each glance at the scar on his knee made him wonder why he was still alive. The only answer he could find, to do something greater. But life was far from easy. Unable to move quickly or stand for long on stage, he lost acting opportunities. At times, Samuel thought his career, barely begun, was already over. Once again he was backed into a corner, feeling invisible, feeling like a failure. Yet, in that vulnerability, his will to survive surged. He learned to endure the pain, turning physical therapy sessions into a ritual of discipline, a reminder that each trembling step was a refusal to surrender. He told himself, if he could survive the train's wheels, no challenge could defeat him. The accident was more than a mishap. It was a crucible, a moment that reshaped his life. Samuel decided to sue the New York Transit Authority, and after years, he won, receiving over $500,000 in compensation. The money didn't erase the physical pain, but it was proof that he was no longer an invisible man suffering in silence. He had spoken up, demanded justice for himself. Later, as a star, Samuel occasionally recounted the story with a hint of humor, but beneath it lingered a shudder. He knew that a single second's delay that day would have meant the world never hearing him deliver Ezekiel's passage in Pulp Fiction, never seeing him as Mace Windu or Nick Fury, never knowing a Samuel L. Jackson, who conquered the world. The accident was a brush with death, but also a vivid warning that his life hung by a fragile thread. From that day forward, Samuel lived with a new awareness. Every moment of existence was a gift. The spotlight of the stage was never to be taken for granted, and from the deepest darkness, he had to emerge stronger than ever. The 1988 subway accident forged a resilient and unyielding Samuel L. Jackson, a man who never forgot the day death was just a heartbeat away. The 1988 subway accident left an indelible scar on Samuel L. Jackson's body and soul, but it was from that near-death moment that he entered a new phase of his career, a phase where the light finally shone on the man once deemed invisible. After Jungle Fever and Pulp Fiction, Hollywood began to see Samuel differently. He was no longer a fleeting supporting face, but a blazing force capable of setting the screen ablaze. From there, he embarked on a journey from gritty indie projects, global blockbusters, a golden decade few actors could rival. In 1995, Samuel starred alongside Bruce Willis in Die Hard with a Vengeance as Zeus Carver, a reluctant Harlem everyman drawn into a battle against terrorists. Samuel delivered a blend of tension and humor that stunned global audiences. The role not only proved he could carry major parts but also cemented his place among Hollywood's most reliable action stars. After Die Hard, Samuel kept pushing forward. In A Time to Kill, 1996, he played Carl Lee Haley, a black father who kills his daughter's rapists and faces a racially charged trial. The role was a gut punch to audiences, fierce yet tragic, reflecting both injustice and a father's desperation. It showed Samuel wasn't just an action star, but a true dramatic artist, capable of leaving the world speechless. By 2000, Samuel stunned audiences again in M. Night Shyamalan's Unbreakable. As Elijah Price, a fragile genius with brittle bones, he crafted a character both tragic and haunting, a perfect foil to Bruce Willis's superhero. This was a villain but also a victim of fate, and Samuel made Elijah one of the most unforgettable characters of the Having fought his own body's betrayal after the subway accident, he embodied a character whose every movement was pain, a raw empathy that gave the role a uniquely haunting weight. Alongside dramatic roles, Samuel entered massive cinematic universes. When George Lucas cast him as Jedi Master Mace Windu in the Star Wars prequels, Samuel didn't just become a proud warrior with a unique purple lightsaber, he became a cultural icon. For millions of black audiences, seeing Samuel among the Jedi wasn't just entertainment, it was validation, a sign they too could be heroes in the galaxy's grandest stories. The momentum didn't stop. In 2008, Samuel shook the world again with a post-credits appearance in Iron Man as Nick Fury. In just a few seconds, his line, "I'm here to talk to you about the Avengers initiative," launched an entire cinematic era. From then on, Samuel became the linchpin of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, the figure connecting superheroes, proving he wasn't just a witness to cinematic history, but a creator of it. This peak was further solidified with The Incredibles 2004, where he voiced Frozone, the ice-powered superhero whose line, "Where's my super suit?" became a pop culture legend. To kids, Frozone was a fun hero. To adults, he was proof Samuel could reach every generation. Throughout this golden decade, Samuel didn't just work tirelessly, he lived with ferocious intensity. Some years, he appeared in 4 or 5 films at once, with grueling shooting schedules that left him exhausted. Yet astonishingly, each role was distinct, from heavy drama to thrilling action, from family animation to superhero blockbusters. He refused to be typecast, refused to be forever Jules Winfield, carving himself as one of the era's most versatile actors. But light always comes with shadow. Success brought global fame, but deepened his solitude. Relentless schedules kept him from his family, missing moments with his wife and daughter. In lavish hotel rooms, he'd sit alone, the TV on but unseen, reflecting on time lost to work. Glory filled his wallet but left his heart empty. Samuel understood this better than anyone. This golden decade was a testament to his unbreakable strength. From a man nearly crushed by subway wheels, from an addict collapsed in a Harlem apartment, he became a global icon, an indispensable part of pop culture. But it also came at the cost of loneliness, persistent physical pain, and the haunting fear that the spotlight could vanish at any moment. That is the tragedy of a legend. Conquering the world but fighting daily with the darkness within. Samuel, though exhausted, never allowed himself to stop, because he knew that pausing, even for a moment, would let the darkness swallow everything. The peak of the golden decade didn't just bathe Samuel L. Jackson in glory. It transformed him into a true box office empire. It's estimated that the films he starred in have grossed over $27 billion globally, a figure that leaves even the brightest stars in awe. In Hollywood, where names often shine briefly before fading, Samuel didn't just survive, he dominated. He appeared in every genre: action, drama, comedy, animation, superhero epics. Each time he spoke, audiences instantly recognized his voice, and each time he stepped into the frame, the film gained a distinct gravitas. But behind the box office brilliance, the price he paid was his health, his body slowly buckling under immense pressure. To maintain his stature, Samuel worked relentlessly. Some years, he tackled 4 or 5 projects back-to-back, moving from one set to another without a moment's rest. The grueling shooting schedules left him drained physically and mentally. Doctors repeatedly warned that he was pushing his body into a state of alarm, but Samuel brushed it off, saying that if he could survive addiction and a near-fatal accident, a few aches were nothing. But the human body isn't made of steel. The old injuries from the 1988 subway accident left lingering effects. His knee throbbed constantly, His back ached relentlessly. On screen he donned suits, strode confidently, commanded superheroes, and wielded a lightsaber. But off-camera he endured physical therapy sessions and bouts of pain so severe he needed hours to recover enough to stand. The cost wasn't just physical. The punishing schedule kept Samuel away from his family for long stretches. He missed key moments in his daughter Zoe's life, and simple family gatherings that for his wife Latanya were priceless. Returning home after months on set, Samuel often felt like a stranger stepping into his own house. The laughter on red carpets and powerful handshakes at premieres couldn't fill the void left by his absence in the lives of those he loved. That was the tragedy of a man celebrated by the world, but often absent from his own personal story. This loneliness grew harsher as he moved past middle age. His endurance waned, sleepless nights stretched on, and transcontinental flights left him depleted. In an interview, Samuel once admitted that some days he woke up in a hotel room, looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the weary man with sunken eyes, staring back. Behind the badass invincible image was a body full of cracks, a soul exhausted from carrying the weight too long. Yet that very tragedy fueled his performances. The fatigue, scars, and pain became raw material, making his characters both rugged and authentic. Audiences loved Nick Fury not just as the Avengers leader, but because his weathered gaze carried the weight of a man who had walked through hell and understood the value of survival. They remembered Mace Windu not only for his iconic purple lightsaber, but for the aura of a warrior who knew the cost of pride. All of this came from Samuel himself, from the real pain he endured, from the losses he had lived through. The box office empire Samuel built made him one of Hollywood's irreplaceable faces. But to hold that throne, he sacrificed health, time, youth, and the peace many take for granted. Glory and tragedy intertwined, creating a bitter paradox. The world saw him everywhere, but inside he grew ever more fragile. That was the heaviest price of greatness. The brighter the spotlight on screen, the deeper the darkness in his soul. Amid the relentless grind of filmmaking, the endless flights, and roles that consumed his time, there was one place that kept Samuel L. Jackson grounded: his family. But family wasn't just salvation. It was also a mirror reflecting his mistakes, a lingering guilt that haunts him to this day. In 1980, Samuel married Latanya Richardson, a woman he met when they were both students. Latanya wasn't just an actress and a talented artist. She was the steadfast anchor in his life. She was the first to see Samuel slipping into the dangerous spiral of alcohol and drugs, the one who refused to abandon him even when he collapsed unconscious on the floor, and the one who led him to rehab. Without Latanya, there might not have been a Samuel L. Jackson for Hollywood to know. 2 years after their wedding, their daughter Zoe was born. Holding his child for the first time was a wake-up call for Samuel. It was the moment he silently vowed to be a good father, to shield her from the shadows he had endured growing up without one. But that promise wasn't always kept. During the years he was lost to addiction, Zoe witnessed her father in pitiful states. Those innocent child's eyes saw things no child should ever see. For Samuel, it was the greatest shame of his life, hurting the person he loved most. After successfully completing rehab, Samuel poured himself into work to make amends, achieving success after success, but at the cost of constant absence. As Zoe grew up, attending school events and performing in children's plays, Samuel was often somewhere else on a film set in Los Angeles, London, or Sydney. He called home, sent gifts, but he knew nothing could replace his presence. Though their father-daughter bond remained strong, Samuel carried the guilt of missing so many precious years. Throughout it all, Latanya was both a partner and a stern reminder. She never let Samuel forget the toll his failures had taken on their family. She reminded him that love isn't unconditional. It must be nurtured with responsibility, presence, and right choices. Her firmness kept Samuel from straying again. He once said that his greatest achievement wasn't Pulp Fiction, Nick Fury, or Mace Windu, but maintaining a marriage of over 4 decades with Latanya, a feat few manage in Hollywood's world of temptations. Zoe, as an adult, chose a path in the arts, becoming a director and producer. This filled Samuel with both pride and emotion. He saw in his daughter the image of an independent, strong artist who dared to assert herself, exactly what he had yearned for in his youth. Collaborating with Zoe on projects felt like a way to redeem some of those absent years. It was a slow but profound reconnection, a bridge rebuilt over past fractures. Family, then, was both the lifeline that saved him from death and the mirror that reminded him of irreparable mistakes. Latanya and Zoe's love gave him a second chance, but it also forced him to face the truth that some wounds he caused could never fully heal. Every family dinner, every moment spent together, was not just joy for Samuel but a reminder of how close he came to losing it all. In the Hollywood spotlight, Samuel L. Jackson is known as a fierce, unyielding force, shouting down the world. But behind the closed doors of his home, he is just a husband and father, grateful to still have a family yet haunted by his wrong. The interplay of love and guilt made his family the only anchor keeping him steady through decades of turmoil. It saved him, but it also tormented him, ensuring he never forgot that glory means nothing without the tight grasp of loved one's hand. In 2022, after over half a century of dedication, Samuel L. Jackson received an honorary Oscar, a moment that should have been filled with nothing but light, glory, and pride. As he stepped onto the stage, the entire auditorium rose to applaud, colleagues shouted his name, and the cameras captured a smile tinged with tears in the eyes of a man who had endured countless desperate nights. But behind that golden statuette, in Samuel's heart, joy mingled with bitterness, for it wasn't just recognition, it also stirred memories of everything he had lost along the way. He thought of his father, the man who died from alcoholism, never once saying, "I'm proud of you." Now, as Hollywood bestowed upon him its highest honor, that father was no longer there to hear, to see, to know that the stuttering boy once deemed invisible had become one of the greatest actors of the century. He also recalled the anonymous years in New York, the cold nights sitting alone in a damp apartment, trembling with drug cravings, believing his career was over before it began. The honorary Oscar was the answer to all those days, that he was no longer invisible, that every ounce of suffering had meaning. But Samuel also knew he had paid a tremendous price: his health, time with family, and wounds in his soul that would never heal. In that moment of receiving the award, he turned to Latanya, his wife of over 4 decades, and Zoe, the daughter who had once seen her father collapse from addiction, but now stood proudly by his side. Their eyes reminded him that this golden statue didn't belong to him alone, but to the family that had endured alongside him, holding his hand through the abyss. That glory was redemption, but also a reminder of past sin. In his brief acceptance speech, Samuel didn't dwell on himself. He spoke of the power of art, of telling stories that can change how we see the world. He knew his life had been shaped by scars, and those scars made him an actor who could touch audiences' heart. Yet even as the world celebrated him, a quiet sadness flickered within. Why did it take half a century? Why did he have to wait until he was nearly 74 for this recognition? Were the achievements before the roles that captivated the world not enough for a true golden statue? Glory and bitterness intertwined in that moment. The honorary Oscar was like a laurel crown, but also a whisper reminding him that time was running out. The gleaming statuette shone in Samuel's hands, but inside he felt only the weight of age, of years lost, of those no longer present to witness. That very contradiction, pride mixed with sorrow, made the 2022 moment one of the most poignant milestones of his life. A belated glory, both a reward and a scar etched deeper into the heart of a legend. After the night of the honorary Oscar, when the applause had faded and the stage lights dimmed, Samuel L. Jackson embarked on a different journey, not one for new roles or box office triumphs, but a quest to reconnect with his roots. Throughout his life, he had carried a void in his heart regarding his origins. Growing up in Chattanooga in a broken family, fatherless, Samuel always felt severed from a vital part of himself. He knew he was a Black American, knew his community's history was steeped in the wounds of slavery and segregation. But the question, "Where do I truly come from?" lingered unanswered. In the late 2010s, a DNA test tracing his ancestry revealed that his bloodline tied back to the Banga people of Gabon in West Africa. The revelation was both a dagger and a flame. A dagger because it reminded him that his ancestors were forcibly taken from their homeland, chained onto slave ships, and cast into an alien world where they were treated as commodities. A flame because it offered him a chance to reconnect, to fill, even partially, the void he had carried for years. In 2019, Samuel officially became a citizen of Gabon, embracing dual citizenship, as both an American and a son returning to Africa. But the journey was far from the romantic scenes of a movie. Stepping onto Gabon's lush green land, seeing people with warm, welcoming eyes, Samuel felt both a sense of belonging and profound pain. He watched children playing in rural villages and wondered, did his ancestors once stand on this soil, sing their songs, only to be shackled and taken away forever? He felt a transgenerational pain, a historical scar that he only now grasped in his bones. For Samuel, becoming a Gabonese citizen wasn't a symbolic gesture. It was a commitment to ensure his ancestors' story wasn't forgotten, to carry the memory of those who lost their freedom so he could stand here today. He shared that being recognized as Gabonese brought not just pride but responsibility to pass down history, to tell the world that his glory was built on the pain of generations before. Yet, alongside that pride came a private pain. Throughout his childhood, Samuel had longed to hear his father say, "I'm proud of you." Now, knowing his roots, he was haunted by the realization that his father, the man who died from alcoholism, who abandoned the family, was also part of that lineage. Tracing his origins, Samuel didn't just find light, he had to confront the darkness of his own family, the brokenness, the loss, the wounds he had carried since youth. This journey home prompted deeper reflection on the meaning of legacy. For Samuel, legacy wasn't just his films or iconic roles. It was about reconnecting with his roots, so that his daughter Zoe and future generations would know where they belonged, so that the Black community could see that even when history tore roots apart, they could be reclaimed, could be healed. But healing wasn't easy. Each time he walked on Gabonese soil, Samuel felt both at home and like a stranger. He was a Hollywood star with billions in box office revenue, but also the abandoned boy from Tennessee, the descendant of those chained and shipped away. The duality tore at him, keeping him awake at night, wondering, who am I really, the star, the victim, or both? The answer came through acceptance. Samuel realized that the journey to his roots wasn't about filling the void but learning to live with it. He carried both pride and pain, light and darkness, and it was this very tension that shaped who he was today, an artist who understood that tragedy wasn't something to hide but to portray, to transform into strength, to share with the world. This painful journey to his roots completed an arc in Samuel L. Jackson's life, from a lost child unsure of his place, to a man who finally found a piece of himself. From that he could look in the mirror, stare into his own eyes, and whisper, "I know who I am." In the twilight of his life, past the age of 70, Samuel L. Jackson is no longer the explosive force dominating every film set as he was 2 or 3 decades ago. He has reached the pinnacle, becoming a living monument, but he also faces an old enemy no one can escape: time and a betraying body. The scars from the 1988 subway accident still linger, his knees frequently swell, and his steps are sometimes slow, no longer carrying the commanding stride of Nick Fury on screen. His back aches persistently, some mornings requiring hours to rise from bed, each small movement a challenge. The once majestic Jedi and steely spy now rely on gentle Pilates exercises, each stretch a reminder that his body is no longer what it was. Alongside physical pain come looming health concerns. Samuel is acutely aware that his past addiction has left lasting damage. Though he's been clean for decades, forsaking drugs and alcohol, his body doesn't forget. Doctors warn of risks like high blood pressure, diabetes, and other lingering effects. His meals are now meticulously planned, low salt, heavy on greens, high in fiber. The party days of old have given way to simple, sometimes bland meals necessary to protect his health. Each daily pill serves as a reminder, to preserve life, he's had to sacrifice simple joys. But perhaps what Samuel fears most isn't physical pain but the prospect of losing his ability to work, losing his voice, his eyes, his memory, the very things that define him. He's admitted that his greatest dread is the possibility of one day being unable to deliver lines. His deep, resonant, powerful voice isn't just a tool, it's the emblem, the soul of his career. The thought of losing it keeps him awake at night. His eyes, strained by decades under stage and set lights, are weakening. He relies on glasses constantly, and in dim light, the world blurs. He fears a day when he might not clearly see his daughter's face or the smile of a future grandchild. For a man who has lived by observing and expressing, this is a terror greater than any screen villain. Samuel doesn't shy away from aging, but he refuses to surrender. He remains disciplined, waking early, practicing Pilates, staying active, controlling his diet. Each stretch, each careful step is a defiance of time. I'm still here. He knows he can't defeat age, but he can prolong the fight, turning each day into proof of his resilience. It's how he faces the ghosts of his past. Having survived decades of addiction, Samuel knows that if he could overcome that hell, he can endure physical pain and the erosion of age. In his 70s, Samuel spends more time with family. He attends fewer premieres and takes on fewer roles, but each is chosen carefully for its meaning, not for quantity. He spends time in the warmth of his home with Latanya, the wife who stood by him through every storm. They are no longer the fiery young couple of the 1980s, but two people who've shared nearly half a century, witnessing both light and darkness, now finding solace in quiet companionship. With Zoe, now grown and thriving in the entertainment industry, Samuel sees his legacy extended. He's proud of her as an independent, bold artist, yet still carries guilt for the years he missed. So in these final years, he makes up for it with presence, with listening, with simple but meaningful moments. Yet the guilt never fully fades. Each sharp pang in his back brings back memories, the subway accident, the years of addiction, the near-death moments. Each glance in the mirror, seeing more gray hair and wrinkles, prompts the question of how much time remains. Glory, awards, box office billions, all seem small next to the question how many more days can he walk unaided, deliver lines, embrace those he loves. The final years of Samuel L. Jackson's life are a convergence of light and shadow, pride and fear, resilience and a betraying body. He doesn't deny that age knocks daily at his door, but instead of retreating, he chooses to face it, to live fully in every remaining moment, to leave a legacy not just through films, but through the courage to embrace his own fragility. And in that fragility, Samuel Jackson becomes a legend once more, not because he is immortal, but because he dares to confront his mortality with all the pride and resilience forged by a lifetime. At 77, looking back on his life, Samuel L. Jackson is like a novel thick with chapters of tragedy and triumph intertwined. He is not just an actor, but a living testament to the human capacity to rise above adversity, turn darkness into light, and transform tragedy into legacy. His story is no fairy tale. It is laden with silent pain, devastating falls, and moments teetering on the edge of death. Yet from those wounds, Samuel forged a monument admired by audiences worldwide. As a stuttering boy, in Chattanooga, Samuel knew what it was to be dismissed, abandoned, and denied worth. His father died from alcoholism, leaving a void that could never be filled. In a small house, Samuel grew up feeling inadequate, unheard, unseen, but that very scorn became the first raw material, carving into his heart an iron resolve. One day the world would have to acknowledge his existence. The years at Morehouse and the 1969 upheaval marked another dark chapter. He joined the student movement hoping for change, only to be convicted, suspended, and branded a troublemaker. For a young man, it could have been the end, but for Samuel, it was a bitter lesson. To have a voice, he had to pay a price, even his future. When he returned to complete his drama degree, he was no longer a dreamy student, but a man who had tasted the world's cruelty. Then came the New York years, the darkness of invisibility. He took minor roles, earned meager pay, lived in a rundown apartment, and faced constant rejection. It was a phase where many would quit, but Samuel didn't. He swallowed his tears, turned silence into strength, and prepared for the day he'd be seen. But those same years dragged him into the spiral of addiction. Alcohol and cocaine nearly killed him, reducing him to a weary shadow, causing pain to his wife and daughter, who witnessed his collapse. In one overdose, he came close to drawing his last breath. Without Latanya pulling him from that hell and guiding him to rehab, Samuel might have been just a forgotten name in a tragic news report. The role of Gator in Jungle Fever was his first rebirth, a performance where Samuel turned suffering into art, tragedy into raw truth on screen. Then Pulp Fiction catapulted him to the pinnacle, making him a name known worldwide. But that light also confined him to a stereotype, forcing him to fight, to prove he was more than Jules Winfield, capable of embodying anyone. The 1988 subway accident remains a haunting specter. Death was a mere second away. The physical wounds lingered for years, the emotional ones, forever. But that moment taught him life's fragility, that every day alive is a gift. It drove him to work with uncommon urgency, as if knowing time never waits. From the 1990s to the 2000s, Samuel exploded, from Die Hard with a Vengeance to A Time to Kill, from Unbreakable to Star Wars, from The Incredibles to The Avengers. He became one of history's greatest box office stars, a face known to children and adults alike. But behind the billions, he remained a man bearing the pain of loneliness, paying the price with his health, his absence from family, and relentless aches. Family both saved and tormented him. LaTanya was the one who held his hand when he nearly died from addiction, sustaining a marriage through over 4 decades. Zoe, his daughter, is his pride but also his guilt, for he missed so much of her childhood. Every hug, every glance from his wife and daughter, reminds him of the times he failed as a husband and father. That torment drives him to live better, work with discipline, and love more fiercely. The 2022 honorary Oscar was a belated recognition, both a laurel crown and a scar. Standing on stage, holding the golden statue, his heart swelled with the image of a father who never got to say, "I'm proud of you." Glory mingled with tears, joy with bitterness, but it was proof that every effort, every fall, every brush with death, had meaning. The journey to Gabon was another chapter of healing. Learning he belonged to the Banga people, Samuel felt both pride and pain, pride for reclaiming his roots, pain for their violent uprooting by slavery's chain. Taking Gabonese citizenship wasn't for show, but a vow to affirm that after years of being lost, he had found a piece of his soul. At 77, his body betrays him daily, his knees ache, his back throbs, his eyes blur, his voice sometimes trembles, but Samuel refuses to let that define him. He keeps training, takes worthy roles, and cherishes family time. Every slow movement, every drop of sweat on the Pilates mat, is a defiance of time. "I'm still here." Looking back, one truth stands clear. Samuel L. Jackson's legacy isn't just films, box office billions, or iconic roles. It's the story of a man who survived an abandoned childhood, years of addiction, near-death accidents, and the loneliness of fame, to stand tall and tell the world, tragedy doesn't destroy us, it shapes us. This is a lesson for American audiences, for anyone who's felt dismissed, invisible, or on the brink of despair. Samuel's story reminds us that even when darkness engulfs, light can be found, we can rise, and scars can become strength. Samuel L. Jackson is not a perfect man. He stumbled, hurt his family, and was dragged to hell by drugs. But that imperfection makes his story human and relatable. In it we see our own mistakes, failures, and moments of weakness, and we see hope that we can rise, rebuild, and turn pain into our sharpest weapon. Today, at 77, Samuel no longer chases glory. He treasures family dinners, listening to Zoe's stories, the quiet hand-holding of his wife of 40. He gives his wealth, not just to loved ones, but to charities, education, and children like the boy he once was, kids who need to be seen, need to be heard. That is his true legacy, not gold or titles, but opportunity and hope for others to keep walking. And so, Samuel Jackson's tragedy is not the end, it's the harshest part of his story, but also what makes his triumph profound. From a stuttering boy in Chattanooga, to a global legend, from an addict collapsed on a floor to a man holding a golden statue, Samuel has proven a simple yet monumental truth. The greatest legacy isn't a box office empire, but the courage to live, to love, to rise after every tragedy, and to leave the world with the belief that however fragile, humanity can be unyielding. Reading Samuel L. Jackson's story, I feel a profound sadness mingled with deep admiration. The stuttering boy from Chattanooga, raised without his father Roy Henry, burdened by feelings of not being good enough, still rose after the shock of Morehouse, suspended for occupying the boardroom. The invisible young man in New York, facing cold auditions, slid into alcohol and cocaine, only to be pulled into rehab by LaTanya's hand. That man poured his life's wounds onto the screen, as Gator in Jungle Fever, like a confession, exploded as Jules Winfield in Pulp Fiction, yet remained haunted by the cage of stereotype. And before the glory came the near-death moment in 1988, dragged by a subway train door, tearing his ACL and meniscus, hobbling on crutches for 10 months, a brush with death, that changed the rhythm of his heart. We ache for him because of the toll his box office empire took on his health. A aching back, worn knees, the fear of losing his voice and vision even as Nick Fury, Mace Windu, or Frozone etched his name into pop culture. We are moved when he received the honorary Oscar in 2022, turning to Latanya and Zoe as if to affirm that family was his anchor for survival. We cherish his journey to Gabon, to the Benga tribe, a way to heal the memory of ancestors bound in chains. The lesson for Americans today: have the courage to face personal and historical trauma, view recovery from addiction as a path to dignity, not stigma, prioritize mental and physical health through disciplined eating over glory. Don't let work steal presence with loved ones. Understand that the most enduring legacy isn't revenue but the opportunities we create for the next generation. And in a country that champions second chances, let's tell the Samuels around us, those struggling to rise, that we see them, we hear them, and we are proud of them. If Samuel Jackson's story of resilience and legacy has touched your heart, please subscribe to join us in continuing to honor legends who rise above darkness. Thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you in the next video to share more journeys filled with tears, loss, but also immense strength and hope.